Hello and welcome to another episode of What's Bugging You. I am your host, Chesley Elkins. Here's my co-host.
I'm Brian Victor, and we're very excited to have a special guest with us here today. But first, we're going to hear a word from our sponsor.
Preventive pest control. Taking care of the pests you see and the ones you don't see. Preventive pest control. It's as simple as that.
Welcome back. This is we're excited to have you here again. This is Mr. Alan Foyer. He is very experienced and versed in pest control. He's been over almost 30 years in the industry.
I retired at 36 years, gentlemen.
36 years.
Yes.
He's an entomologist, associate certified entomologist. And explain some of your background, I guess.
Oh, yeah. So I came out in the United States Marines in 1989. I needed a job. I started in pest control, and that's what I've done ever since. And I thought it was a temporary job while I found the real job, and it turned out to be the real job. So that's the short story. And I've just been blessed to spend my career in the greater Albuquerque, central New Mexico area. So I kind of learned how it went here, and I can't say enough about educational opportunities, and I love learning about these things and then applying what we learn. So there's the short story of who I am and where I came from.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever encountered anyone as excited about pest control as you are.
Wow, they're out there. I think a couple of them work for Preventative now. You just need a little bit more time with them. You'll see they're as crazy as I am or was. So it just takes a little time.
I've found that there's a lot of people out there that never really thought that pest control would be their career, and then they got into it and turned out that they loved it and found that it's a great business, a great opportunity to help people out. So
it really is. And here's what I loved about it to last 36 years is you use your brain, you use your hands and back, and you use your heart. And if you have the opportunity to integrate all those things in your daily routine with what you do, it's not slogging away just hands and back, but you're dealing with people, helping them, and meeting them sometimes on their worst day. And if you can take away a problem, that really does your heart really well. So you get the benefit of serving somebody, and of course making a living at it at the same time. So it's fantastic.
Well, today it's we're talking about, as Chesley calls them, the bloodsuckers, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're talking about the ticks, the fleas, the bed bugs, or any of those type of things. And I know we brought you in specifically for this because you have a very very deep knowledge of this and a lot of experience with bed bugs, the nasty things, and so we just want to hear kind of what your thoughts are and some things you're doing for those.
Right, absolutely. So going back to what I just said is when you meet people like on their worst day, is imagine living with these little vampires in your house, like they're feeding on you and your family or your pets. How awful is that compared to I've got ants on the counter, I've got a cricket making noise in the bathtub, or even a termite eating the wall. I mean, these are feeding on my family, and in some of these classifications, we know that they're vectors of disease, and that's not good. So we've got to mitigate quickly.
Probably the one that most people across the country are most common or most familiar with is fleas. What's your experience with fleas here in New Mexico and in the broader sense?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we think about fleas, and I think of the three, that's the grandest vector of pathogens, right? So they basically move a disease from one host to another through their saliva. Just has a repository within their salivary glands, and of course, when they bite somebody, they introduce some saliva as an anticoagulant. So that's where we get the vectoring of the disease. And so that's where we think about fleas most. But what I would say here in New Mexico is fleas of that trifecta that we're talking about, it's the least popular or least common that we would see.
And why is that?
It's limited by humidity. So fleas, for them to complete their life cycle from a larva to an adult, they need a higher or a more humid environment, which is typically not presented in most of New Mexico. Doesn't mean it can't happen, doesn't mean there are zero fleas here. Matter of fact, the State Department of Health has a rodent burrow management program, mostly to manage fleas, in the wild, so that we don't wind up vectoring it through, raccoons and squirrels and stuff like that. So it's real, but think about when we're dealing with a burrowing animal, it raises that humidity, which is where the fleas can thrive. So typically when we get them into a residential situation, it's very rare. So again, my time with Preventive, on an annual basis, we dealt with maybe half a dozen real flea calls, and most of them were false alarms because of perception.
Yeah, I know talking to some of our colleagues in the industry in other states, that would be something they would deal with on a routine basis for a majority of their customers, is mitigating the fleas that were in the yard and on their pets and
Absolutely.
encroaching in the house as
Yeah,
well.
well, again, because think about once we get past like the hill country of Texas, you get to Austin and east, and most of that, the humidity is not a challenge. It's a normal day is 50-60% humidity, and they thrive at 40 to 50%. So we don't see that routinely. So we should be aware of them. We should know how to manage them in New Mexico. However, it's just not that big of a deal in our area.
Well, one thing we do have a lot of here is, and commonly misidentified as a flea, is springtails.
Sure.
And they almost look like they hop around, look very similar to them. And
Yeah, so that's a simple misidentification of a very small insect that has that jumping ability. Basically, a springtail is a detritus-feeding, fungal-feeding, very simple ancient insect, and it has a cool little feature underneath its abdomen. It's a modified sex organ called a fulcura, and it basically is kind of wound up tight, and it can boink and makes them bounce, and they'll go 12 or 14, 15 inches, and so people would misperceive they have a flea issue. But these animals have no interest in feeding upon us. Again, they feed on, detritus and, mostly fungus and stuff like that in the environment.
Yeah, in a house, I think you usually see them in the bathrooms most of the times or outside windows.
Some moisture problems, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. They're just moisture seeking. When they wind up inside, as a matter of fact, it's counterintuitive. They're inside because it dried up outside for the most part. That's why they've migrated on the inside. I had a nice little bumper crop of them at my house. I installed a nice little flower garden with wood chips for around a bay window at our house when we first had children. And by doing that, I gave us a springtail problem. And they were on our counter, they were in our kitchen, and until I removed that, despite my efforts to control them with pesticides, I had to actually remove that feature to stop the springtails from just being an annoyance inside of our kitchen. That's a quick aside, but obviously they're not fleas. But to the layperson, they wouldn't know. It's a small insect that jumps, so we kind of like through the cartoonish aspect of our lives, we go, oh, that's got to be a flea. So we want to, if anyone can learn something from this episode, is like, let's get it identified appropriately and then go from there. Yeah.
So if in the rare instances where we do see the fleas, what's kind of like the perfect storm that comes together to make that possible here?
Yeah. So again, a high moisture situation. We see a lot of flea issues in more rural settings where there's a lot of burrowing vertebrate pests that are nearby, like rodents, squirrels. Squirrels are a rodent, believe it or not. So a lot of squirrels and chipmunks and things like that. So they live in the ground and due to that humidity, they have opportunity to have a flea problem. And if they're spending a lot of time around the residence, they can wind up coming inside the residence. And usually it's coupled with a household pet. They can bite us. I've personally been bitten by fleas doing pest control. They can take a blood meal, but they're not comfortable on us because we're not hairy enough. At least I'm not. Maybe you are, Brian. I don't know. Just so, you're a man. You're a man's man.
I'm a hairless cat.
Exactly. So they like to get inside those hair shafts. They're designed like in this format. They're designed flat this way so they can move in between the hair shafts and then latch on and get a meal. And they want to spend their entire time on the host, but they often fall off and wind up back in the environment. So, again, it's something that we need to know how to handle as professionals. What I would tell the layperson that's listening to us is let's make sure we get an appropriate identification, and let's not start spraying poisons or pesticides or whatever term you want to use for it, control materials, until we know what we've got. Otherwise, you're going to fail. You're going to fail to control what you don't have. So that's something to always keep in mind.
Yeah, I've seen some instances where people went on vacation to a place, higher humidity in the Midwest or Texas or something, and when they've come home, their pets have brought some fleas home. Is that something that, because of the dryness here, would just kind of go away on its own, or would it need intervention?
It depends. I think these fleas will do fine in that situation long enough to warrant intervention. I don't think that they're just going to dissipate on their own. If you bring them into the household, they've got food on the pet. They don't necessarily drink water, you know what I'm saying? So they get that, they get their moisture from the blood. It's really at the challenge at the larval stage, when they hatch out of the egg. The larva is a little worm, and it's not on the pet or even on the human. It's going to be in the environment nearby where the adults basically defecate. It sounds very clinically awful, but it's true. They feed upon the dried blood from the adults. So that's typically what we run into. Really, all the pests we're going to talk about today are hitchhikers. That's how they wind up in our homes for the most part. They can't all walk in. They could possibly do that, but for the most part, the genesis of the problem is we've brought them in. Our pets have brought them in, or we've brought them in our household goods and stuff like that.
And so basic treatment is you treat the animals, take them to the vet, have them treated, or put a flea collar on them, and then treat the yard and the house. Basics measures.
That's the simple 1, 2, 3 is on pet care, outside maintenance of likely areas where the fleas would be able to propagate, again, through the life stage, where the larva can spend time. So that's where your pet would hang out, the dog house, underneath the deck, under the shade of a tree. That's going to be the key. And then inside, whatever needs to be done inside gets done. I mean, without getting into deep detail within the scope of this conversation today.
And that's one thing you pretty much need professional help, though. There's not a whole lot you can do yourself on that, right?
Yeah, I would agree for the most part. I think to get it resolved quickly, but once we get on pet care and a flea collar or a topical on pet pharmaceutical, that's going to be the main host. So once that host has become, inoculated, if you will, from the flea concerns, it'll taper off pretty quickly, even if we don't intervene as well. Like I said, maybe half a dozen of the thousands and thousands of work jobs we do every year at Preventive. Half dozen's really a flea problem, so it's almost statistically zero. But we should be aware of that and just slow it down, identify it, intervene as appropriate. And the control materials are good. The layperson, one thing you're going to have as part of the intervention program is thorough vacuuming of your home. So I can give you the reason behind that, but we're going to ask you to vacuum your home every other day. And that's going to go a long way to managing the fleas as well.
And I guess the next bug I'm going to transition to is the treatment's very similar, and is ticks.
Right. Yeah. So
me having animals growing up in the valley, ticks. I'm a little more familiar with those. You know,
These ticks again, they don't have the same humidity requirement. It's a much more resilient animal. It's not an insect. It's an arachnid, so it's associated with spiders and scorpions and all that. And again, they're known vectors of certain diseases. The most common one that everyone hears about is Lyme disease. That's typically more of the deer tick in the northeast of the United States, up by like Massachusetts, New York, things like that. I've met several people that have had Lyme disease. It's been diagnosed. I guess they can do a blood draw and see it. It's a bacterial disease, and if they catch it early, they can intervene. If not, it becomes a chronic. You get very fatigued and achy, almost like what's that, fibromyalgia or something like that. It kind of presents like that. So I'm not an MD, but that's what I hear. So people are tired all the time. So that's the disease. It's hard to get, like anything else. However, just the same thing happens. They hitchhike in. Oftentimes the pets they go and they run along the bosque, or you've got a pretty wild yard. You have neighboring animals and wildlife. If you live in the valley here in Greater Albuquerque, believe it or not, probably every day there's half a dozen wild animals transiting your yard, from raccoons to coyotes and all that, and they're probably just loaded with these animals.
So the ticks aren't going to need the same level of humidity for thriving and surviving.
No,
right?
not at all. Not at all. They have a completely different life cycle. They have more of a gradual metamorphosis than a complete metamorphosis. So there's now there's a larval stage, for lack of the term technically, but it's just a little tiny, and these ticks are tiny. They're the size of a poppy seed off your bagel. Those are called seed ticks. They're going to grow up to be the large ones that take those huge blood meals off your pet, but that's where they start, and they start feeding on little animals like mice and things like that, and then they graduate to the next level, and they wind up eventually on a dog or a cat.
Yeah, I think the difference between kind of the behavior between fleas and ticks is fleas want to live their whole life on the host. Fleas will each cycle, they'll take a blood bath, come on, they drop off, right, kind of thing. And
the ticks basically the male ticks, once they get to the adult stage, will want to stay on the host, and that's when you see a large population around the really blood infused areas around the ears and the collar and all that stuff. Whereas the females will drop off to lay thousands of eggs in the environment, then they'll try to get back on a host. So they do deliberately come off the host, whereas the fleas stay on there. The males and females both want to be on there, and they lay the eggs on the host, and they fall off. There's no like stickiness to the eggs. They fall right off like chicken eggs. They roll right off a table, and they wind up in the environment. That's where the larvae carry on. So the life cycle's off the host for fleas, more accidentally than anything else, whereas with ticks, they deliberately get off and they lay just a lot of eggs in the environment, cracks and crevices. So sometimes just general pest control methods, I would probably say 30 to 50% of our clients, when we do general pest control, get a benefit of tick control just by the standard services that we've prescribed as part of our preventive pest control service. We accidentally on purpose kill kill these pests. Despite the
Spraying around the foundation of the house and some cracks
well,
and crevices.
Yeah, we teach our guys where cracks and crevices where we really want to do a lot of treatment for bugs, and that's where these female ticks want to lay their eggs. And so we're often getting a lot of collateral, happy collateral damage, if we want to put it that way. So, and then same thing. I mean, on pet treatments through a veterinarian or a groomer, yard treatments. Thorough yard treatments, and then inside treatments as necessary. Probably the vacuuming is less important when it comes to tick control, but it certainly wouldn't hurt for general cleanliness and stuff like that.
And for a good rule of thumb, like just avoid you're taking a dog to a dog park or something. I guess how do you avoid getting ticks? And as for a human, I know avoid tall grasses and stuff. That's what they'll kind of climb up the grasses and try to catch on to their host, right? But
yeah.
So I don't know. Is there any other tips to avoid getting ticks?
I mean, if you're going to take if your pet's go on walks with you, or take them to the dog park, which I would never discourage. That's good. That's healthy for the animal. It's healthy for the human. That's a good bonding experience. Just check your animals. We had a little Shih Tzu, and she's probably almost a year old. We took her to a dog park, and we were just cleaning her up after the park. And we said, let me check her ears. And sure enough, she had a tick on her. She picked it up at the dog park. And this is Rio Rancho, where it was just like a sagebrush and nothing. It wasn't like high grasses or anything like that. So it could happen. So inspect your animals. But then you could do preemptive care. If you know you're going to take your animal out a lot, get a tick and flea collar. For what that's worth. Remember that this is a pesticide collar, and that basically it just moves the oil from their body, moves it across their fur or their hair, and that's how that works. Or you can see your veterinarian for prescriptions. And so we're actually putting a pharmaceutical type pesticide right on this animal. So that's a whole nother episode here where we can talk about toxicology and stuff like that. So this is a positive effect of pesticides actually on an organism instead of just in the environment. So that's what I would do. But just inspect your animals, because their ticks are, the adult ticks are pretty obvious. And I always start looking around the ear. You flop the ear back and look, and you'll see them. And
if you do have the ticks, like feeding on your animal, what's the best way to remove those?
Well, yeah, you want to get the whole tick, so you don't want it with an. I'm not an expert on this, because you want to grab them by the head and pull them out whole. There's a lot of talk about you can smother them in Vaseline and they can't breathe, which could be true, because they don't breathe out of their mouth; they breathe out of spiracles and trachea on their body, which how most arthropods would breathe. So you can smother them in petroleum jelly, and they're going to asphyxiate that way. But if you're unsure what to do, just go see a veterinarian, so that you don't want to leave the head or the mouth parts embedded, because that'll get infected. So I don't want to give too much advice on that, because I've removed a grand total of 1 ticks from all of my animals. So I have more history taking lice off my kids than taking ticks off animals. So.
Shave their head, right? That's all you do.
If it's a boy, that's probably the short way to do it. But if you've got a little girl, that's probably ill-advised. So anyway, that's a whole other parasite. That's for another class. So we'll talk about that.
Well, now let's get to the big one that everyone hears about, and people travel or whatever, and is the bed bugs.
Yes, so of all the parasites that we deal with in our homes, this is the big one. So like I told you, we have a handful of flea jobs, we have a handful, maybe a couple dozen tick jobs, but we deal with hundreds of bed bug jobs every year, and this is a real thing. So bed bugs came back into the United States and into the Western world from the rest of the world with a lot of the free trade agreements that occurred in the 90s.
Yeah, I remember when I started in pest control in the early 2000s, and the first time I heard of somebody needing a bed bug treatment, I didn't think bed bugs were a real thing at that time. I just had never had any experience with them. And then from that time, 20 some odd years ago till now, we've just seen that explosion.
Yeah, so they were, just the quick history lesson is they were generally eradicated in the 40s and 50s through the use of a product called DDT, which was liberally given out to housewives and people, and people were using DDT in multiple types of formulations, from dusts to liquids, in their homes, on their kids' cribs, on people. You can see pictures and film reels where they're actually dusting DDT dust onto prisoners of war and or people that were in concentration camps because they were covered with lice. But that was another way. But it was this product that was non-selective at all and killed everything quickly. Right. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, DDT was deregistered in the United States. It still has uses in the third world. Not to disparage, just call it what it is here. And it's had a lot of uses for mosquito control. So if we keep talking about parasites, people always thinking, what's the most dangerous animal on the planet? And we think, great white shark, grizzly bear, polar bear. It's the mosquito, followed by the flea. I mean, they're in a neck and neck race. And so we ask ourselves, the application of intoxicating pesticides in an environment, is that worse than the biological pathogens that are spread, the viruses and the bacteria. So there's always going to be that tug of war. And so DDT went away. So DDT was the causality for us to not have bed bugs in the developed world. Then again, through free trade agreements, this is not to disparage that either. We opened up the borders. My first big case of bed bugs was down at New Mexico State University in off-campus housing, and there were folks from Asia. And again, they were living 5 people to a 2-bedroom apartment. And I visited one lady next door. She was a single lady, not a student. She was having an introduction of bed bugs coming in. We inspected her home, her apartment, and I found no evidence where there was an infestation. So there's a differentiator between an infestation and an introduction. Okay, so let's not confuse those words that start with I. An introduction means they were placed into an area, but until they start reproducing and get generational, that's not an infestation. So we were finding at her place there's a bed bug here and a bed bug there. No fecal stains, no cast skins, no eggs. There was not various life stages. We went next door. We weren't even scheduled to go there. But as the folks saw us, can you come to our unit? Well, let me talk to the property manager. Sure, we went in there, off the chain. So this is my first experience with, a reintroduction to bed bugs. This would have been 2007.
Right. And so aside from the or discontinuing of DDT, we also, like you said, a lot more trade, a lot more travel, also change in the luggage, from being like a hard leather sort of thing to some
it could be, because
stuff.
you could argue that, and it's a fair argument. It's not wrong, but it's going to be in other goods that they're bringing in that they could put inside the backpack or whatever. So I wouldn't get. I don't want to. I don't want to advertise for Samsonite.
Sure.
But the bottom line, though, is let's be realistic. It's not just that. That could be part of it. It's a reasonable premise, but I think the fact of the matter is they're hitchhikers, and so they get in your stuff. They're hiding there for whatever reason. It was a convenient place to hide between blood meals, and now you brought them from A to B. And by the way, let me come back to that story, just so you know. All these kids, these were doctorate students. These were kids coming to the United States to learn how to be, literally medical doctors, doctors of engineering. So you see what I'm talking about? So the bed bug infestation in the United States actually was due to affluence. Affluence brought bed bugs back in the United States. So if I'm going to throw a rock, let me throw a rock. You're allowed to punch up. I heard you can't punch down. So if I punch up, affluence brought bed bugs back in the United States. But then what's happened, guys, is matriculated down to those of lesser means.
Yeah, I've seen very little differentiation between the people. People that travel a lot, and go to some pretty cool places, and then come home and very nice houses, and all of a sudden they've got bed bugs there.
They don't care, and bed bugs don't. They're non-discriminatory. If you bleed red blood, they're interested in you. And the disparity between the last 2 pests and bed bugs is they prefer us. They like that we're not covered in fur and hair. It's easy to get to where they can take a blood meal. And so that's the big differentiator when it comes to bed bugs. We are the primary host.
And they're anywhere that people are. I have friends that are dentists. They've had bed bugs in their dental chairs.
Yep.
I literally read this like last week. An airline had to shut it down because had bed bugs on the airplane.
Yep.
Movie theaters. We've done movie theaters for bed bugs.
Absolutely.
So.
Yep. I'm off. These chairs we're sitting in now. Not to say anything wrong about this fine establishment, but that they could establish themselves here as long as their host shows up. And here's what's the thing about bed bugs: they can go a long time without a blood meal, and so they don't need to be taking blood meals all the time. They don't just die. You're not going to fight siege warfare against them. They can easily exist for 6 months without a blood meal. And the record, and I'm going to cite Dr. Denny Miller from Virginia Tech University. She's one of the leading foremost researchers on them because she watches them and feeds them herself and works on them in the field at housing and all that. She's like, hey, I had an adult female live for 555 days without a blood meal. And so that's extreme. That's probably not normal. However, it's that far end of the bell curve that we have to recognize that could be true at any time. So even let's take off 20% of that and say we get 400 in some days. That's over a year they can go without a blood meal, and that's all it takes to keep that population alive. When it comes to bed bugs, guys, we're not talking control. We're talking eradication. We cannot allow a single bed bug to exist in that environment. And by the way, when I say environment, and I don't just mean a house or an apartment unit, I mean, we've got to get them all, So if we've got
This includes eggs, everything, right?
yeah, we got to get it all. We've got to shut down the entire life cycle, and that's the real challenge. Like I said, we could do an entire segment just on bed bug control. This is a job for a professional. I will say to the listeners that are not professionals, you have two really good tools in your home when it comes to bed bug control. You have a vacuum cleaner. Okay, you can suck them up. And by the way, people always ask the question, well, if you suck them up, they're going to live in my vacuum cleaner. Well, no, that's like surviving a wind tunnel that they're testing a jet aircraft in as a human. That's like 250 miles an hour. You'll be obliterated by that. So they don't survive the vacuuming, whether it's the actual mechanical action or all the gook and dust and all that clogging up their breathing holes. I've opened up my vacuum after sucking up a bunch of bed bugs, and they're all dead with zero pesticides. The other tool we have in our home is the clothes dryer. Most of us, not everyone. So, I mean, again, maybe people don't have a vacuum cleaner, maybe they don't have a clothes dryer, but most people do. And if you use those two tools, you will keep your population down. People
Tell
always
them why the dryer. I
yeah, the
guess.
dryer. I mean, it's scientific. Again, follow the science. It's a scientific fact that 122 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 minute kills all life stages of bed bugs, and the hardest one to kill is the egg. Okay, and so if we've got, say, we just take all of our bedclothes off, all of our sheets, pillowcases, the pillows themselves, all the soft line stuff, throw them in your dryer, about half full for 30 minutes, high heat. If your dryer's working appropriately, high heat, by the way, if you touch it when you're done, that feels like touching the hood of your car in July. You can't leave your hand there. That's how hot it gets. That's easily 122, more like 140, 145. They're all dead, just bodies caught up in the lymph trap.
And backing up just a little bit for people that may not be as familiar with them, what are the signs that you have bed bugs? What should we
Oh, this is
watch
where I
out
wish
for?
I had a picture, so we'll keep that stuff in mind. So basically, we're looking for, I think, 4 things. We're looking for live bed bugs. The adults are the size of an apple seed. They're rusty red color. They will, what you'll also see in the environment would be, you'll see the juveniles, which is like small adults. They're a little smaller. And again, they're rusty red. They're just smaller. You're going to see their cast skins when they molt, and they're going to kind of look like, it's just a bunch of keratin. So it's going to be kind of like a yellowish color, like a clipped fingernail, right? And then you're going to see fecal stains, which are little black dots, which they're like embossed. You can actually feel they're raised up a little bit, but they're just about 1 millimeter. And you'll see the little white eggs. And so all of this can be seen with the naked eye. If you really want to see the details, some optical correction, like my grandpa reading glasses, the plus 2.5s, it really illuminates it for me. But if we take a 3 to 10x magnifier, you can really start to see a lot of the features on all these, both the animals, the cast skins, and all that stuff. So those are the 4 pieces of evidence we look for. And once you get a reasonably developed infestation, all that stuff's pretty apparent. And the places to look, the first place I go as a professional with all of my experience, I go right to the head of the bed or the shoulders of the bed. I go right to the box spring, and I go for those little plastic reinforcers. I flip them down, and that's the first place I look. Okay, but yeah.
So I know pretty much everyone I know in pest control, if they stay in a hotel, that's the first thing they're doing. they're checking that. What can some people do who aren't in pest control, don't know what to look for, to avoid getting these hitchhikers with them when they're traveling?
Look for all that evidence when you're traveling. Hotels certainly get a rap, and again, most hotels now have a written standard operating procedure when they have a report of bed bugs, let alone a real infestation. Taking the room out of service, hiring companies to come in there and do something about it, and knocking it out. But you're looking for all that evidence I just talked about. So my personal story, my son graduated high school. He's a aerospace engineer now. So we took him to Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach. We got a hotel, and my wife went in the bathroom, and I'm checking, and that's the only hotel I've ever found evidence of bed bugs, but it was all old. And so I told him, don't say nothing to mom, okay? Because she wouldn't sleep anywhere for the rest of
I don't
the
think
trip.
I would either.
No, I wouldn't say nothing to her
I wouldn't
I
sleep
checked
there.
out. And what it was, I just on the dust ruffle, I just saw where they basically had some of the little black dot stains, but they had all been laundered, right? So they were just kind of embedded in there. So it was old evidence, and I once I saw that, I'm like, I'm gonna keep looking. I found nothing. No cast skins, nothing else. That's what we're really look for, the signs of life. So yeah, you can do an inspection. Same thing. Look at the head of the bed. Look at the headboard. The bed bugs are I wouldn't say they're lazy or industrious. They're just instinctual, and they're gonna get to the closest they can to the host, and that's the best place where you're gonna be letting off CO2 and body heat above the covers is gonna be at the head of the bed. So that's where I'm spending my time. And I tell people just pretty much within arm's length is where we're gonna want to look for those bed bugs and find that evidence.
Yeah, two common things we come across, or themes, I guess, is when a person has them in their home, is one, they traveled recently and stayed in a hotel, or they had guests travel and stay with them in their house who brought them with them, and that's usually what happens.
Yeah, that can happen too. Again, oftentimes if I get to the root of the story, which sometimes I don't care about, sometimes I'm interested in, it just depends on the engagement. Oh, their friends were overseas. And it's a little bit more acceptable there. Almost all the American hotels now, man, they know if they don't mitigate bed bugs quickly, they're going to get wrecked on the internet, on social media, and they're going to wind up in lawsuits because if they don't mitigate it. And so most of them just jump through hoops to take care of it quickly. And if someone says, I stayed at your hotel, I brought home bed bugs, they're like, well, what can we do to help you out? Because they've learned it's like we don't want to be, and it's really not the hotel's fault. The only time it's their fault is when they don't take it seriously. But if you're staying at like any brand name hotel, they have an SOP, and they know if they hide it, man, that's going to be discovered in a court case, and they're going to write big fat checks.
Well, and aside from being disgusting, is there any health concerns like we do with ticks or fleas?
Yeah, that's the interesting part. After a lot of studies by CDC and independent university studies, there's been zero disease vectoring by bed bugs, which I found magnificent. That's almost unbelievable. But I'm going to, again, follow it. No one can be suppressing this, right? Because, again, the same idea is happening. It's a puncture wound, saliva for anticoagulant action is put in, and through that you would assume there'd be some sort of vectoring, but they've not found it, which is fascinating. And I'm not an epidemiologist, and that's not what I do. So all I can do is follow what these doctors of epidemiology are looking for, and they're finding none of that. The biggest thing that happens when it comes to bed bugs, we do have some physical marking. You can, depending on who you are, you can wind up with scarring from the bites if it happens enough. You might wind up with some allergies because whenever we like any animal that would bite you or sting you, they're injecting a protein, and your body is offended by that, so you can have an allergic reaction to that. But here's the big one: it's the psychological side, right? So people are just like, man, I'm sleeping with vampires, or even worse, my kids are sleeping with it. So you almost turn into that's all you focus on until it's solved. And that's that heart side that I'm looking at. I want to get this solved for people quickly.
Are you able to, just by looking at bites on somebody, differentiate and say they were bitten by bed bugs versus something else?
No, that's impossible. Okay. And don't let anybody tell you that. Right. We as pest controllers have no business, unless we also happen to be a medical doctor, have any business looking at somebody's body. And it's volunteered all the time to us, and I simply shy away from that because I'm like, I'm not credentialed in that, and there's so many things. So again, my wife and we went to a pest control event in Pensacola, Florida, stayed at a really nice branded hotel. On the second day, my wife just broke out, and then I started getting marks in the soft areas, like under my arms here and inside my thighs. And I'm like, and I don't skew allergic. She does. And so I'm like, what's going on? I looked around the room. There was no parasites that could be found. Who knows what else is going on in the environment? Maybe there was allergens. Maybe there was goose down. I don't know. All I know is I broke out. She broke out. But it looked like I was bit by something, but we couldn't prove any of that. Matter of fact, I played that little game on our Facebook page of like, hey, what caused these bites? Mm-hmm. What we teach our guys is like, you can't look at them and diagnose it. And unfortunately, certain medical professionals do that. Oh, that's got to be this. We have to take that with a little bit of cynicism and say, yeah, you sure about that? Let's prove it. Let's go into the environment and go look in the places we'd find these parasites. And again, the most likely parasite inside a residential home in New Mexico and the United States is still bed bugs. Other parts of the country, you probably could be running into fleas. But again, you'll see the fleas. They're not invisible. You know, they'll be bouncing all over. You'll see them.
You've been doing this long enough that you've seen a lot of evolution in the treatment of bed bugs and seeing them develop resistance to certain pesticides and stuff. Currently, what do you have to say about like how they're being treated currently?
Well, again, there's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of right ways to do it, and there's some wrong ways. I think you said something really important a moment ago. It was resistance to pesticides. Right. What happens when we hit a population of arthropods, insects, or even ticks or whatever with the same chemistry? They do build a resistance to it, like we with our immune system. So we have seen that. So we have to appreciate that that's real. I've seen it personally. What's evolved is I love this technology, is instead of using a synthesized chemistry to control bed bugs, we're using biology. We're actually using fungal spores. Bovaria bassiana is that's the clinically scientific name of this product, trade name Apprehend, and we apply that into the environment as the label directs, coupled with vacuuming, coupled with taking things into the dryer, so cutting the numbers, and then we apply this product, and it's almost magical how well it works. It basically gives them athlete's foot on the inside because the spores go inside their spiracles, germinates inside where there's moisture in their body, and it kills them. It gives them fatal athlete's foot on the inside.
So are you seeing less and less people using heat treatments for homes and stuff?
Oh, I mean, so completely heating a home.
Yeah,
that's another way to go. Heat's a really good way to do it as long as you don't melt anything in the house, and you have to recognize that comes at a reasonable cost. So heating is another way to do it. There's challenges to it, right? You have to monitor it, you have to babysit it, you have to have thermocouples throughout the house, you have to go in there and stir the environment. You have to confirm it's good, and you know, there's some fantastic videos out there where they're heating a room, they go to the couch, and then they lift up the couch cushion, and the bed bugs are okay because they're insulated from the heat by the couch. So that's how good that couch cushion is. And as soon as it hits them, they start running in circles, and they just fall over and die within about 25 seconds. So that's how good heat is. But also the vulnerability is heat. If you don't stir the room, and remember, heat goes in one direction, it goes up. So the lower parts of the room, they're going to move in that direction, and they're going to try to find some sort of insulative shelter. So you have to recognize that fact as well. So if there's a tremendous population and maybe they're under the carpet edge, that could be a problem when it comes to heat. And again, to get the heat to 122 plus down here, what's it got to be at the ceiling? Maybe 25, 30 degrees higher. And then what happens then? What happens to that TV? What happens to that fire suppression device right there? You have to think about all that stuff. So it's a scientifically awesome process, but you have to think about, you know, some of the downsides as well.
The key thing you said, I think, is bed bugs is something you're not treating yourself. I mean, you can treat your clothes and sheets, and a lot of times we have our customers as part of the service, like, hey, put all your sheets in this jar the day they show up, all your clothes, but we're going to chemically treat this with our
biologically.
Biologically,
I mean, and that's
and a vacuum.
To close it out. I mean, you could keep the bed bugs down to a dull roar, as my mom would say, with the vacuum and with the laundering. I don't think you'll get eradication. And as I'm going to go back to what I said before, if we don't get eradication, we lose. And the last thing I'll say about bed bugs, remember, they're hitchhikers, right? They're going to move around. They're not going to walk in from the outside. Your general pest control service, like we talked about, we accidentally on purpose get control of ticks, I think, because we treat in logical locations. Well, this is not going to occur at all when it comes to bed bugs. So if you've got a general pest control service, it really comes down to your agreements and contracts. It's like, what do you want? What are they willing to cover? All I would tell you is that our maintenance service, anyone's maintenance service, is not going to keep you from getting a bed bug problem. So don't have that false sense of security. What you want to do is understand, okay, does my pest control company have the knowledge and the fortitude to go and solve this problem if it occurs, and can they educate me as to what my role is? Okay, so we do have certain things. The hardest things for the layperson to gather when we do bed bug control, we need you to resume your sleeping habits, and people hate this, but you're the bait. You got to go back into the environment where the bed bugs are. They've been feeding on you for X amount of time. We're going to go in there and remove as many as we can through vacuuming, laundering. Then we're going to make our applications of Apprehend. We have to get the bed bugs wanting to move through the treated zones towards you. And that's how you're going to get results. And that's probably the biggest thing we got to explain to people. You've got to get back to sleeping. If you go to another room and stop sleeping where the problem was, you're still going to have the problem. If you go to a hotel or your mom's house, you're still going to have the problem when you return because they just sat there, they didn't move around. You instigate movement through your CO2 and body heat.
Yeah, that's presented a specific challenge for people that own and operate Airbnbs, and they're trying to eradicate them and not have any guests stay there while they're getting rid of them. So that makes it challenging.
Sorry to interrupt, but what I would say, what we got to do as the industry is say, well, here's what we'll do: we'll treat, and then we'll find people that have courage in our company and go spend the night there, and that you let them stay for free, let them enjoy that, and that'd be one way to consider doing it. You have to be creative.
Yeah, think outside the box.
You got to think outside the box, and sometimes we get so stoic when it comes to business, we don't think outside the box. And I've even told people, I'll go spend the night there. I'm going to charge you if I'm not getting a benefit. It's if it's not a really cool Airbnb, yeah, you're going to pay me to spend the night, but I'll be the host. I'll be the bait, because I believe in what we do. If we went in there and did all the fundamentals, the chance of me being bit by bed bugs is really low. I'm not worried about disease, and if you're going to pay me, or even give me a credit or something like that for another Airbnb stay or something like that, I'd be more than happy to do that. I have no fear of doing that. Now my wife wouldn't do that, but I'm the pro, man. I'm supposed to go in harm's way. So
if we were going to do a recap on all of these pests that we've been talking about today, one of the things that I feel like is a common theme between getting control of these, or the number one thing, is definitely a positive identification, know exactly what we're dealing with, and know that a springtail is not a flea, and that a red mark on your body is not necessarily caused by a bed bug,
or a flea or a tick. We don't know.
So find the animal and get an identification.
100%, yeah. Identification. Not like, well, my friend on the internet said, right? Because you see so much garbage out there. That's really important. And then just kind of know what the right mitigation is. There's so much bad information still on the internet and on Facebook pages. I read it every day, and I have to make a judgment whether I want to get into that argument or not about some fallacy about why they're there or how to control them.
And also it's interesting that when we're talking about these, how the applying a product is only a part of the solution, and sometimes a small part of the solution. There's a lot of other factors.
Absolutely, yeah. Coming back to like fleas and ticks, how you maintain your yard is important as well. So if you've got a bunch of overgrowth, you let your lawn get really out of control, a bunch of weeds, you create a higher
better environment for them.
Yeah, a higher incident environment to have, again, wildlife transiting, hiding, dropping ticks, picking up ticks. So keeping a reasonably kept yard, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be not off the charts, like overgrown. You'll do well with that as well.
And I just want to tell our listeners, if you sense or if you suspect you have any of these pests and stuff, please feel free to give us a call. We'd be happy to talk you through it, educate you, let you know things that you can do on your own. And at one point, if there's something we can help you out with, we're more than happy to set you up with service.
And I say everyone's got one of hopefully everyone's got one of these in their pockets, man. Just get up close, take a well-focused picture with some good light on it, and send it in. I mean, we'll give you the text numbers, and we can look at that for you. Be cautious of what you hear about and read on the internet. I mean, I'm not saying it's all wrong, but some of it is. But just send it in to a trusted pest control provider and get a positive ID. I know if we get a bunch of garbage pictures and we're like, I need a better picture. Well, that's what I have. I'm like, can you take a better one? Because I can't give you any advice. And I know, I'll speak for Preventative. You send us a picture, we'll ID it for free for you. You know what I'm saying? There's not a cost for that. But coming to your house does bear a cost for a professional company. We do have to pay for the trucks and the insurance and the wages and all that. So do yourself a favor, take a good picture, and take the tips from this podcast, and think about the places I told you to look for these things, and that's going to help us help you.
Brian, any parting advice or thoughts on the bloodsuckers?
I'll tell you what, man. I've been in pest control, how many years? 24 years now, and I think some of the people always ask me, "Oh, what's the gross stuff you see?" And some of the grossest ones I've probably seen is bed bug infestation. They're just nasty. I mean, I've been in one almost like a murder scene. And I think you were with me. It was pretty nasty, and it is unfortunate. It was a gentleman who was very mobile, and he was kind of the bait for years in his apartment. And,
Yep.
But it's disgusting, but I mean, we can take care of it. It's not the end of the world. It used to be, I think 5 years ago, it was the end of the world. Like, sell your bed, sell your furniture, do this. But now you can treat it, and sometimes that is the case. But that's the best option. But
Absolutely, it's done, and I'll use a different adjective. I'll call it heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's more heartbreaking to me just to watch it, that it's gone on so long, and that again it's matriculated down to those with little lower means, less means. And, well, I'm proud of Preventive because we, not to throw this out there, but we do a fair amount of pro bono stuff. And I want to thank all of our customers who pay us, because you guys are part of that. We don't get to be righteous without your help. So those of you who pay us to do our services, you're helping us help people who can't.
we get paid for this. You guys get paid for this?
Don't play coy. Yeah.
I
mean,
I
it's
agree.
got to be sustainable.
It's very heartbreaking. I have a personal story. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, there was one time out in my yard, I found a bird that was wounded, and I, just being a curious, little kid and stuff, and I actually was able to pick up a bird, which usually, they're going to run away from me. This one couldn't, and I kind of, messed with it for a while and played with it. Later that day, it turns out it transferred fleas to me, and they got all through my hair. And I have never in my life forgotten how miserable, how nauseous I was having fleas run through my hair, and having to shower and get rid of those. And it's stuck with me for
The flea stuck with you?
no, just that
Your hair's
feeling.
gone now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. See, now I have a hairdo that is not conducive to that for sure. But
Exactly,
yeah,
yeah.
but I don't forget that. And so when
No.
I see somebody suffering through that, and when you see the bed bugs and see the marks from them on like a baby's crib and stuff, it gets to you.
Yep, like I said, bringing it full circle. Like, what I love about this career is I get to use my head, I use my hands on my back, I get to use my heart. And so, and again, I love the fact, my time with Preventive, you guys fully encouraged and allowed us to go out there and provide pro bono services when people just couldn't afford it. And what would happen is when they can't afford it, they do crazy things, and they don't really help. They actually make it worse. They may be poisoning themselves. And really what they're doing is they're Johnny Appleseeding bed bugs all over. They're giving them to their friends and their neighbors, and it perpetuates the problem. So let's solve it faster, and let's take the money off the table. And what I do love, we talked about the new technology, the chemistry or the biology of Apprehend. That product has allowed us to do bed bug work quicker, more efficaciously, and for less money. And I love that. That's one of those technology accelerators that I think is awesome. Instead of jobs being thousands of dollars, they're hundreds of dollars. And, just to tip my hat towards the Apprehend people, Canidiotech, they're like, look, when you guys are doing pro bono stuff, we'll give you the stuff for free because we want to be part of that. Nice. And that's fantastic. So I always want to tip my hats. It's when pro bono happens, it's not one person getting the virtue signal. Like, I'm doing it, but I recognize I couldn't do it without our paying customers and without the folks that developed this awesome product and spent a lot of money getting it done. So it's there's that balance, man. You just it's the yin and the yang of life, and I think that's what's great about pest control is we have that opportunity to have compassion and serve people that way too.
Well, it's been fun, a pleasure talking to you, Alan. Appreciate your help
you.
again, and we'll probably have you out here again, hopefully for something else.
It's fantastic, guys. Appreciate it. God bless y'all. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah. Well, this will be out in January, so.
Well, hope you had a great holiday season.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thank you for joining us. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe, and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.